So a little bit of context and background. My background has always been in Sheffield or around Sheffield. I started with Cluster back in '97 through to 2002, and then went on to build a couple of national networks for student providers. And part of the roadmap and constant theme that came up in conversations throughout that process was the area of digital inclusion and rural hotspots, and bringing together a team of people, like-minded people, under the Broadway Partners brand has enabled us to look at some new areas of last-mile delivery, and I'll talk about what TV Whitespace has won. So basically, the methods that we work on are, the preference is always fibre to the home, and we know that. I worked on a couple of projects in the Cotswolds over the last 2 years where we've installed and got contracts to install 5,000 to 10,000 properties with direct fibre. Whitespace enables us to operate over the legacy TV frequencies that have been handed back to Ofcom. And this has been a piece of work that I've been undertaking with the Affordable Access team within Microsoft in the States, Nominet in the UK, and a couple of the vendors that are interested in developing the chipsets to enable this to happen for a residential rollout. Nominet, they, as you probably know, they operate the UK domain names and they operate that database, and they're used to operating the database that applies those domain names to the IP addresses. They operate the frequencies that are available within the TV spectrums. So if you take Sheffield as an example, we will have the legacy spectrum that was available for TV transmission, and what's been handed back is basically we can operate in the gaps between what was BBC One, what was BBC Two, and we can deliver in a single channel between those frequencies to get internet from point A to point B. The frequencies differ around the country, so Nominet manage that database nationally, and there are database operators that operate in other territories as well. There are other databases available. Google, Microsoft, Sony have a database, but the only one that is commercially ready and available and dynamic is the one from Nominet, which is why we've partnered with them. Microsoft, I've been working with them for the last 24 months and their affordable access team out of the States, a nice gentleman called Paul Garnett. We started talking around the issue of digital inclusion and affordable access, and he basically gave me visibility of their products that they were distributing in India and Africa in order to get affordable access to some very remote locations and villages. I looked at the case studies, I looked at the technology, and I thought, well, you know, the application is very much the same in the UK. We have areas in the Peak Districts, let's say, that you've got tree cover hills and all those problems to deal with, and this technology will potentially deal with that. So working very closely with Microsoft, they kindly introduced us to the Centre for Whitespace, which resides in the University of Strathclyde, and they have a centre dedicated to the development and testing of the service, and they agreed to open their doors and their faculty to enable us to go out into the field and do some testing. So in terms of the rural application, it basically gives us the capability to deliver over a wider range than conventional. It's basically marketed to us, and we market it to others as Wi-Fi on steroids, basically. But it basically deals with the tree cover, the land undulation, and we picked one of the most remote locations we could find, which was the Isle of Arran, just off the coast of Scotland, to test this technology. And we've been working for the last 12 months there with the remote communities, and we've now got over 200 connections there, and we've created an uplift in their experience. Very shortly after we switched the network on, we got some visibility in the press through the Financial Times, BBC and Wide magazine, and since then the inquiries have come thick and fast from other communities around the country that are seeing the same problem. They're not going to be reached by the interventions from BT. BT have released a database of properties that will not be served by any intervention, that will sit within the final 5% of sub 2 meg connections, and that totals around 1.5 million properties in the UK. So if that's what we're dealing with, then it's quite a large market sector to address with this technology. What does that look like in practice? It basically means that we've got to go out into these remote locations and do a lot of work in regards to site surveys, working with the community, working with the landowners. We actually, in the example of Aaron, created an ISP as well, because we thought, well, if we did the engineering in isolation and tried to sit down with an ISP like a PlusNet or a TalkTalk or a Sky, they're not going to be interested in a remote location like this in the numbers that we're dealing with. So we created Aaron Broadband just to get the scheme away. We now have, as I mentioned, over 200 customers. In order to distribute the network, we've got agreements with the landowners and farmers. They get a little bit of a kickback and they've got an option, free broadband, or we just give them a nominal site share fee back into their business. They give us a choice of buildings or just a piece of land, and we start the installation. We've had installations in and up and running within 4 weeks. In terms of an example of what Whitespace represents in terms of coverage, it does operate non-line of sight, and we tend to look at the site surveys on each location fit for purpose with Nominet. And we get some very detailed mapping on how the land affects the signal, what the interruption will be from other outside elements, and that will give us an indication of what speeds will be achievable and what service coverage we will get. It's only then that we start to commit to the communities that we can actually provide a service and what speeds they can expect. In the case of Aaron, this was our first section of the island that we provisioned. A lot of these areas were promised a BT solution. The cabinets were enabled, they placed orders for service, and they were either turned away for line length and line quality issues, or they just couldn't get a service at all. So the services that we've been able to deliver just in the TV Whitespace bracket, and I'll explain the upper levels, is we still, if we can get line of sight, we'll deliver over 5 gig wireless, and that enables us to deliver. We've been able to effect a change from customers that were seeing 2 meg up to the doctor's surgery there that now gets 133. In other cases where they're still on 5 gig, it might be a further distance, and the contention might kick in because of the aggregation points that we're using, but an effect of 1 meg to 66 meg. But just isolating the TV Whitespace aspect, where we've got non-line of sight and communities are very much remotely disconnected, we've been able to change the experience from 0.3 up to 15 meg. We're now progressing all the way down south of the island. We've over Christmas been working really hard, and we're round to Whiting Bay now, and we plan to get round the rest of the island over the next quarter. Also, the vendors that we're working with are working on channel aggregation, which means that we can bond the channels now on their new hardware, which will enable us to get from 15 meg potentially up to 100 meg based on the frequencies being available in that area. But the effect has been quite profound on these communities to see that change from 0.3, where it's totally unusable, to 15 meg, where it just gives them enough to operate iPlayer and the things that we're used to in the city centre. We're now working on an urban application and working with housing associations and student housing providers to fill in the not spots within the urban environment, because what it deals with is the same issues, non-line of sight. So it will get round buildings, tree cover and round hills, and we've got some local parties incorporated in those projects. The vendors that we're working with, Sony was the first company that we were introduced to. They're developing new chipsets at the moment, but Microsoft kindly, over the Christmas period, when we showed them the case study of the number of paid customers that we have now in various locations, including Aaron, they reached out to D-Link, and jointly Microsoft and D-Link over Christmas made an announcement that they will release a Whitespace capable device in this quarter. and we're hoping to get some more information on pricing over the next 4 weeks. That will give us a very achievable uplift in speeds over the next couple of quarters, but by the end of 2016 we were able to test the 50 meg product on the existing hardware with some of the existing suppliers, Adaptrum being one of them. The next quarter will achieve that channel bonding exercise that I've just mentioned, which will give us capabilities up to 100 meg, and further on from that Sony and others will enter the fray. Nominet have been a invaluable partner on this because they've got a very dedicated R&D department that are very committed to using their funds for digital inclusion projects and getting the internet into places where it's not. Similarly, Microsoft look at this from a different point of view. We're looking at the UK with 1.5 million users. Microsoft are looking at this from an international perspective with 3 billion users that are unconnected. So by getting this technology into remote locations, getting it commercially used by the customer, getting them to pay for the service, it proves that it can be rolled out internationally for Microsoft. So we're now looking at the US and Canada as potential target markets because they have their regulations in place to enable us to deliver the service. We're also dedicating a lot of time in the areas of social housing, smart city, fibre to the home and digital inclusion projects, and drilling down on the residential service wrap. So Sky have been a very willing partner in that because they recently made an announcement that they won't be signing up any more broadband customers that have got 2 meg or below. So if they don't have the capability from their exchange to get 2 meg or above, they won't sign them up as a customer. So that was quite a bold move for them, and the reason being is it just doesn't give them the experience they want from their set-top boxes. So the reason we're talking is that potentially in the rural environment, this potentially gives them a fix to get above that 2 meg threshold and provide a robust and reliable service that enables them to deliver a service to their set-top box. And our roadmap in Sheffield, and the reason for collaborating with Arup is we plan to look at collaboration in the Sheffield City Centre. Nominet, we've met jointly, and Microsoft's Smart City team are very interested in looking at the urban deployment for smart city applications. And we plan to look at the deployment of a POP site in the Sheffield S1 area and look at the capability of the frequency and delivery and range and test it in the real world, and then try and commercialise that offer over the next 6 months. And that's me. Any questions?
I think it's fantastic because obviously the government's USO for 2 meg is now gone up to 10. So quite clearly as a technology will answer that question straight away, won't it?
Yes.
The 2 meg is just a ridiculous target that the government set and realised it quite quickly that they need to move on.
Yeah.
So there are areas, obviously globally within the UK, but specifically Sheffield, that have not spots that this could cover quite quickly.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like you say, it's non line of sight. So if Aaron had done it, I'm sure most of the rest of the country could do it. If you could do it there.
And to be honest, we tried to stress test the assumptions from the vendors that we would get to the 15 meg. We went in with quite a sceptical view that it would cope with getting to those remote not spots, urban or rural, and it's over-delivered, and we're more than happy with it. I think there's 2 areas that we've really focused on, and the figures are quite compelling. Is the rural one is 1.5 million properties that are going to sit in that sub 2 meg bracket, but there's also just the affordable headline in social housing. That speaking to social housing companies, 40 to 50% of their tenants don't have affordable internet access. No matter what speed you give them, you can give them a £34 a month contract. It's aspirational. If you can get that down to £10 a month and deliver 10 meg, that's where the affordable issue will be solved, and that's where we're trying to get to. Is make it more pervasive, cheaper, but give a robust and reliable service that enables engagement with government, engagement with other IoT applications that offer a benefit to the housing association and the tenant as well.
I mean, we're going to run a series of workshops, aren't we, after this? So have a think about how we could utilise this in use cases afterwards. So we're basically giving you the technology, and all we now need to do is go away and think about how we can utilise this in a value proposition or use case scenario. So hopefully Peter will give you food for thought on that later.
So anyone else got any questions? Or a question for Mark?
Given essentially BBC and the other terrestrial TV channels have managed to cover on the legacy bandwidth most of the UK, are you able to utilise their broadcast points for your technology? Because presumably you've got a good data set there about what you can broadcast and what premises that frequency can reach.
Yeah, Nominet have got a really brilliant agile tool to be able to just drag and drop the pins, and we can get instant feedback on what's available there. For example, Sheffield, we went through an exercise just because it's it's very dynamic, it works in real time. And the reason for that is that you have the Lyceum next door that uses radio mics, and if you take up their frequency, you've got someone's internet chat coming through on a stage performance. So basically, the test in Sheffield showed that we're very frequency poor. So we've only got one channel that we can use at the moment, and it's a nice problem to have because it shows that we need to do some more work with Ofcom to get urban environments like Sheffield up to speed, because that's really not acceptable that we've only got that one channel available. But you're right, we can go through the frequency stack, but the problem with Sheffield is those frequencies that we can use further up the stack or further down, they're not concurrent, they're not next to each other. So basically it's a good problem to have and work through and workshop, because all the parties that are involved, Nominet, Microsoft and Ofcom as well, will work hard to fix the problem. It's not so much a problem in rural environments. The frequencies are pretty coherent and next to each other. So yeah, you're right.
Just, can you say a bit more about how the business model works for delivering that more affordable product?
Yes.
Because I'd really like to see BT kicked out of town, because they're not committed to Sheffield. They haven't been for a long time, and so
yeah.
I mean, can you scale up to deliver what you're talking about across a city?
That's the exercise we're going through at the moment. I mean, basically the Arrow broadband issue was setting up the ISP to prove that it can be commercially delivered to the end user. They will take the service, they will pay for it. The service charge is around £25 a month for 15 meg, all inclusive, no BT line needed, and that was just a line in the sand really. The only running cost we've got associated with that is the database cost to Nominet, which is nominal. We've got a bandwidth charge for the IP transit, and there's obviously our service desk and all the other stuff, and obviously a small profit. But certainly we can bring that down for things like social housing, because the major element that's taken away is the BT line. And that's why Sky and other telcos that we're speaking to see it as a way of circumventing BT. And the noises I had out of Microsoft initially was, if we can get the channel bonding and the frequency bonding together, it's an ADSL killer, and it will get rid of the BT line. So let's push the agenda. Let's prove it can work in real-world environments, not just in Africa. Well, Africa is a good example of a real-world environment, but we've got different drivers here and different problems in terms of frequency, interference, and all those things. But
so is this the first major conurbation you're trying to do here?
We've done 4 in total. We've done 1 in Wales, 1 in the UK, 1 in Scotland that we're publicising at the moment, and we've just got a few contracts with social housing companies to deal with them directly. In that situation, the commercials are, we just deliver a last mile service from POP to site, and then dealing with the telco, we just deal with the last mile, and they'll pick up the IP transit onwards from there. So they just get a wholesale proposition in effect.
Yeah.